Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to Manifest Ed, where we try to keep you apprised of all trends going on in education and also expose you to some of the innovators, provocateurs, pioneers of the space. And we're doing that again today. Joining me for our conversation is the CEO of Noodle, John Katzman, live from the New York offices. John, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, John.
Look, we really appreciate you making the time. You are clearly one of the people that has been shaking up this space for a long time on behalf of students. And it's an interesting story you've got, both personally and your company slash companies that you've been a part of in time. Why don't I just give you the floor for a minute? I would love to have you tell us that story and how the journey led you to where you are at Noodle today.
Well, I graduated with a degree in architecture, but I, during college, was uh, doing a lot of tutoring for the SAT. And when I graduated, I started a company called Princeton Review just to make some money. My thought was do this for 3 years, build a little bit of cash, and start a software company, actually, because I also had some background there. And Princeton Review kind of took off, and I ran it for 20 odd years, took it public, and then left to create a company called 2U. Ran that for 5 years, and then uh, just before the IPO, left to create Noodle. And Noodle is growing nicely. We've raised now over 100 some odd $1 million, and we're growing pretty well. Um, the thought is we can help universities and colleges lower their costs, raise their student faculty engagement, raise their resilience and capacity. And so far, it's going pretty well.
I think that might be a little bit of an understatement. Y'all are building up a ton of momentum, and I know the space is watching it happen. By the way, I'm happy to report that I contributed to Princeton Review, took my GMAT classes through you.
How'd it go? Well,
uh,
here you are.
well enough, I suppose. Well enough, I suppose. I certainly I did well enough on the GMAT. Certainly didn't break any records, but it got through it and got where I needed to go. So thanks for that. But it's interesting you talk about your history, and you sort of started three companies at three different phases of education at the time. Um, the model for Noodle is a little bit different. Maybe that's putting it mildly than certainly traditional OPMs. Talk about a little bit on how you approach that differently when you kicked it off and how that's evolved to now.
When I started 2U, the cost of creating one online program and scaling it was between, I don't know, 15 and between 10 and $15 million, really. And further, it was pretty high risk. You didn't know, could you build something as good as a campus-based program, because we were working with elite schools. And even if you did, would anybody take it? Right? The first lot of online universities were terrible, and I believed and still believe that it's because the schools doing them were terrible, not because the medium itself was the problem. But convincing great schools that they wanted to go online was hard, and there was a lot of risk there, and so you had to, it was, you had to have a return for your investors commensurate with that cash and with the risk. When I started Noodle, my thought was, look, we the biggest problem, the 800-pound gorilla of higher ed, is cost. How do we reduce the cost? Every industry that technology disrupts, it brings the cost down, and that hasn't happened here yet. And so um, I think now to launch a good program costs under $3 million, and there's no risk. You really can do the math and figure out pretty much uh, how the economics are going to work out for the school, what the demand is going to be for the program. So giving that savings back to the schools and through them back to the students, everything we're doing is around that. So we're approaching this space almost the way Walmart approached the retail space. Like everything we do is designed to save schools money with high quality. And the prime directive is efficiency and flexibility and resilience.
I'm going to keep you there for a second in terms of the cost side of it. Um, this space for a long time obviously has had tuition going up and up and up. A few folks out there have tried to freeze it, but we have not quite seen what you're alluding to, which I'm hoping is going to happen, which is most industries, the influx of technology ends up reducing costs, creating operational efficiencies, and then dropping, in this case, tuition for the end user. We really haven't seen that at scale yet. How far away do you think we are? Do you think we will see it as we all hope?
I think there's, uh, if you look, the cost of teaching, the actual professors working with students across higher ed is about 20%. And that hasn't, and those numbers haven't moved dramatically in the past 20 years. One thing that people don't realize is they think the cost of higher ed has been rising dramatically. In fact, it's been flat to inflation for 20 years. Every year, schools raise the sticker price, but also raise their discount rate. They're giving money for three reasons. One is need, one is merit, that they're competing for the best kids, and the third is yield, that they're giving money to the students who they think that additional extra dollar would convince the student to come. And but the net tuition has basically moved with inflation. Within that cost structure, teaching has been relatively flat at 20%. Operations have become significantly less efficient, and the the student services and academic support, those costs have tripled. And the question is, how come technology can't address that? Some of it really hard to address, things like mental health issues and increased regulation that as schools are dealing with all sorts of things that they really weren't even 20 years ago, much less at 50. Um, but but I think there's savings there. And then the third piece is marketing and recruiting. And that traditionally has been 1 to 2% of tuition. In this new age online, it's like 20% of tuition. And there are schools paying 40% of tuition towards marketing and recruiting. So I think we are finding some efficiencies in the physical plant, in scaling up with the same physical plant, and therefore lowering that cost. But we're spending it in in what looks to be a, a scaling up cycle, like that. Just it keeps getting hotter, and everybody keeps having to respond. You can't walk through an airport without hitting 10 ads for online programs.
Yeah, it's an interesting insight on the operations really hasn't hit that efficiency point, and I'm sure maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit. What's been fascinating about watching Noodle is again, I think your belief, and we had, if you know Tori Patterson at Owl Ventures, and I know you do, we've had him on the show. One of the things that he alluded to was, look, we're going to come to a point where these elite institutions will start to liberate their content, their instruction, their resources, utilizing technology. And maybe what happens on campus has to be somewhat limiting because of brick and mortar. But now, with the advent of tech, we'll see more of those big brands start to enable that really across the globe. And we've started to see some movement in that regard. Do you think that's afoot as well, or is it hinged to the ability to operate at that level that we're not? In other words, do we have a dependency on the operation side that you just alluded to that may prohibit some of those institutions from liberating it, as Tori alluded to?
There are two ways of liberating. One is there's a Silicon Valley narrative that we might be post degree, that we can just use badges or certificates, and that this whole degree thing and is is unnecessary and over. And there's just no evidence that that's true. The value of a BA and the value of a master's have gone up every year, not down. Um, you know, at some point you've got to appeal to the data. So I don't think it'll be liberated in that various certificate programs are going to take a big dent out of degree programs for a lot of reasons we can talk about. On the other hand, the lifelong learning space for professionals, we think it might be four times larger than the graduate school space already, and it's growing pretty quickly. The idea that everything you've learned by the time you're 21 is going to get you through to retirement is nonsense. So the question is if higher ed, in liberating its brand, moves aggressively into that space. That
Mhm.
that Stanford could be with you not just when you're an undergrad or graduate student, uh, but could be a useful part of your professional growth at any point. And and that's where I think that liberation could happen.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up this lifelong learning dynamic. I had an example of this just a couple of months ago. Uh, with a woman that I had hired out of undergrad. She went to a Big Ten school, really good school. 7, 8 years later, went back and got her MBA from a reputable MBA program. Was recently interviewing for a leadership role at our company, and she was talking about like, hey, I really want to demonstrate that I'm immersed in our competitors, et cetera, et cetera. She ended up getting herself certified by one of those competitors, ended up getting the job. Hiring manager remarked, it was really impressive that you went and got yourself kind of upskilled, reskilled, and got that certification. Made no mention of the MBA, made no mention of the undergrad degree. Obviously, those things were of value to get her to this point. But your point on, I think I've heard you make the illusion of it's like investing in a house. You don't just buy it and then not put in, new windows, doors, carpeting, what have you. It's an ongoing iteration. But to your point, right now, those certificate short courses and boot camps usually aren't coming from our alma maters, if you will, right? How do
Right.
we get after that? I've I've got some thoughts, but I would love yours first.
I think so far the universities, to the degree that they're playing at all, are playing as tenants on platforms like Coursera and are um,
Mhm.
uh, a very little of the tuition revenue for those courses is going back to the school, um, but also, in a sense, the those platforms, they're building their brands and they're bringing in content from elsewhere, and the university brands are helpful in giving them credibility up front, but become less helpful every day as more schools get on them and as more content comes from elsewhere. As the platforms themselves build brand, they will end up boxing out universities if universities aren't careful. So the question is how to make them not a tenant but an owner
Yeah.
of those platforms. And the problem with that, and I'm sorry if I'm rambling, um, is that any one school can't be the solution. There's so much you could learn between the time you graduate college or grad school and retirement. There's so much you could learn in so many different areas. No one university is going to be the solution. So, like a school of continuing ed by itself versus the platforms has a huge problem. So, I think what you're going to need is an alternative platform with significant ownership by the universities themselves, and that ownership can play out in a bunch of different ways, both equity and revenue split. And that's kind of what we're pursuing. Like, can we empower universities to play in that space more aggressively?
Yeah, because in an ideal world, right, our alma maters would have a sense for not only when we graduated and maybe that first job, but where are we 5 years, 10 years out? Not just from an income standpoint. What titles do we have? What industries are we working in, so that they could proactively surface um, a certificate that says like, hey, you're in digital marketing. There's this new TikTok cert that's out right now that you probably need to be aware of. Get that cert from your alma mater, and then it's going to be supplemented by a course from Professor Katzman on how to lead with that material, or how to how to present that material, whatever that is, but an ongoing continuity. But that would require some sense for being able to track the graduate in this case to understand where they're at in that journey.
That's right. And what if the school in addition said, and that thing you really need, we don't teach it, but that other school does. And we're working together, and instead of saying, let's go and have 500 different courses that teach that thing, let's work together to say, I'll take care of this kind of student and you take care of that kind of student, even within the same context. If you're teaching how to give performance reviews, how you would teach it to and what you would teach to a newly minted manager managing a couple people for the first time, and a senior exec, who's been doing this for a while and has a completely different set of questions. Um, there's a lot of different areas, both in tech and in business, and then at a lot of different levels, depending on sort of where you are in your journey. But some of that is the school reaching out to you, and you're right, they need better information about you. Some of it is just you knowing that when you need something, they're there. Like, do when you have a problem, are you looking back and saying, I wonder if, Duke has something for me? Or do you start fresh with a Google search to try to find somebody who does?
Do you think, John, that that will be obviously, again, tech infrastructure needs to be built to be able to create some of this, to your point. But if that were there, would you market that as an upfront value when you go into buying the degree? Is that something that you would market on the back end to make students aware? And I guess, like, how would we go about re-educating the consumer on this? Are you seeing that even start to take place yet?
We've worked with alumni offices, and generally they have not stepped up in the way that you're describing. Like, they don't see that as their role, and they don't see it um, as something they should be good at. So there's really no one at the school at most universities who thinks about you after you've graduated, other than if you're going to donate money. And so I think there's a mindset shift that has to happen. The building of a platform and the efforts by schools that you might want to be on this platform because we and other schools could then help you through your life journey, um, is is the kind of conceptual leap that needs to happen.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. I think, for a century and a half or whatever it's been, we've just kind of told people, hey, get the piece of paper and you're good. And I think we've got to rewire our own mindsets along around that, and including the innovators in the space, to say, like, here are the solutions that can help address that.
I
Can't
think
help.
actually the students, the workers and students have already figured that out, that they need to continue to grow, especially in an economy changing as fast as this one does. The schools just have to figure out how they can be part of that answer.
Well, to your point, students have figured it out, right? Like, we know the grow with Google certs here, thousands of people have enrolled in them. Vast majority of them already have degrees. So to your point, the students are saying, look, I need both of these. I need a degree, and I need to maintain it on an ongoing basis based on what life and career station I'm at. So the students have figured it out. It feels like we're maybe the ones that are trailing in terms of providing the right solution for this on an ongoing basis. Um, Let me keep you on lifelong learning, maybe goals and certs. I've heard you talk about the need to set up what those goals are, and then, like, we're and before taking one of those, again, short courses, upskilling, reskilling type efforts, what are those goals, and, like, did we meet them? how, how do you see that evolving, right? And that's another part of this. It's like, it's how do we know that this is working, and how do we create a feedback loop to make it better?
My interest in the Noodle companies originally was the toughest thing about education, both K 12, higher ed, pre K, everything is measurement, right? Like, let's take K-12 schools for a second. We all can agree on the goals of a K-12 school system, right? That over the next 40 or 50 years, your graduates will have jobs that pay a living wage that they really like and are engaged with. As the economy changes, they'll continue to be employed because they're agile and smart. They'll be healthy and happy. They'll have low suicide rates, low alcoholism and drug abuse. Like, there are a bunch of tells for contentment other than just surveys, which are useful also. And they'll be good members of society. They won't go to prison. They'll vote, right? They'll be engaged with the community. And if you said those are the three goals of K-12, I don't think a lot of people would disagree. But we don't measure any of them. We don't look to say, what did we do in the K-12 system with this kid and what was the outcome against those metrics on a constant basis? And you don't have to wait 40 years, by the way. There are all sorts of tells along the way that are proving to be pretty predictive, right? So it's like one of these images online that that sort of starts fuzzy and then gets sharper. Like, you can get the outline of it pretty quickly. So every place we look in the education system, the ability to measure and uh, and the accountability that comes with that is really lacking. And when people do it, they generally do it terribly. So, the notion that the way to judge a course is how many stars somebody gave it. Like, there's a right. I gave 4 stars to to some Avengers movie, right? Like, it did it help me in my job? Did it help anything? But it was a lot of fun. Um,
Right.
so so and the problem is that each course you take, each program you take, has a different goal. So the question is, when I write this course, when I create this program, what am I trying to do here? Who do I help? And how will I know that it helped them? And if you really force the subject matter expert or the school to define how we'd like this course to be judged as a thing unto itself, and then we can survey, and we can survey at the end of the course, we can survey a year later, 5 years later. Like, we can develop an actual data stream against the metrics that you chose that are specific to what you're trying to do. And if you think about the roots of accreditation, that's kind of what it's about. Just show me that you're doing things intentionally and some evidence that they're working. And we live in such a data rich society right now that we can take that concept and, I think, really turn it into something very quantitative and very approachable for people who are thinking of taking this course. What are my goals? And if I got the kind of outcomes that they're describing here, would I be happy?
Yeah. And as you're speaking, and just again, this idea that if we're going to have degrees as a foundation, how do we understand where people are at those different life stations, be able to follow them, be assistive as they go through their career so that the course you're talking about is completely relevant to where they are. In other words, like, yep, there's always going to be responsibility on the student, but I think we can do a better job of maybe curating um, the right content at the right time based on what career they've chosen.
Yeah. When we're building our platform, we don't think of it as a marketplace. We think of it as a course catalog, that every course should be different from every other course, either in what it teaches, who it teaches it to, or how it teaches it, so that we can help you figure out, what are you looking to do? Who are you? What's the right course for you?
Yeah, I, um, I'm going to keep you on this the creation of degree programs a little bit, and I've heard you talk about this as well. Where I know part of what Noodle is doing is helping schools to create those online degree programs. Where do you see that going, especially in light of we're reading all kinds of articles on sort of the gender breakdown in terms of getting even more slanted female to male for undergrad. We've been talking about the rise of short courses and boot camps. Like, how is Noodle looking at the go forward market for online degree programs, at least for your university partners, and how that's evolving?
There are a couple things that are, to me, somewhat axiomatic, although we push on them all the time and make sure that that they make sense. One is that in every other industry, we've moved away from thinking of like I've got my on ground thing and my online thing, right? There's just a thing. So Home Depot doesn't care where you buy the hammer, if you buy it online or if you buy it in the store, they don't care if you take possession of it at home because it's delivered or in the store. It's one system built around a flexible approach to the consumer, right? And you just look, the New York Times doesn't care if you ingest news online or in a newspaper, and you can just go through every industry, and so we're going to end up moving away from online programs versus on ground programs. We'll think in terms of there's an MBA program at the school, and take each course however you want. And the question of the infrastructure of the school, fixing it for on ground is hard, but creating an infrastructure that can service online students and then applying that infrastructure to online, on ground, hybrid, whatever, right? It's like building a new bridge next to the old bridge. Eventually, you move the traffic to the new bridge and you take down the old one. So you take the people who are administrators at the school and you move them into systems that make sense versus trying to retrofit those systems for on campus. So number one, it's an agile world, and number two, um, life learning and undergrad and grad are each separate pieces, but they should, as you say, flow together. The if somebody's getting a degree in digital marketing, of course they should be ready to take an assessment to get a certification from Google and Facebook and whoever, uh, as just part of that degree. It in the same way that a nursing program, the expectation is you're going to pass the nursing boards. Medical program, you're going to, law program, you're going to pass the bar. It's crazy to think of them as completely separate objects. Um, that uh,
It kind of
they're
is.
not exactly the same, but they're tied.
It is crazy. I'll give another story of uh, student athlete at Notre Dame was he's an athlete there, was a goalie on the hockey team. Now he's playing up at Quinnipiac. Uh, Good luck to Quinnipiac. They just had their draw last night. And I think they're playing St. Cloud in the first round of the tournament. And he's getting his MBA there. So, and he's contemplating whether he's going to try to play professionally or whether he's going to go into corporate America. So we've been working on his resume and whatnot. And it's been interesting. I've been sending it to a couple of places, and some of the feedback from the hiring managers was like, "No, those degrees are great, but it would also be great if you got certified in X and Y and Z." And so there's a real time example now of somebody again who got two pieces of paper, but they're still saying like, it would be great to have a cert here. And in my head, I'm just like, well, why don't we just put these things together? Like, what?
They
Why?
can't be totally together, but they can certainly be thought of as connected.
Yeah, and maybe that's better said, John. I just kind of feel like after 4 or 5 years, like there's no reason that we can't get I guess what I would call the success skills that I think universities do an excellent job of cultivating and producing, and also just a couple of the hard skills that the marketplace in real time is saying, you know what, we'd like for you to have this so you can hit the learning curve a little faster.
The in real time is the problem. Is you guys are changing your practices so quickly that that a freshman in college right now, by the time she graduates, is you can't have the curriculum now because you don't even know where you're going to be in 3 or 4 years. So you're like the last chapter. Like I've gotten all of the basics. I understand the mechanics, the concepts, but in the same way that you go through law school and then you study for the bar, you should go through that program and then be ready right now to join the workforce with that certificate. It's like the
Yeah.
the last piece of the puzzle.
Well, and I'll be the first one to say, like, look, I'm definitely on team higher ed. Both my parents um, were public school teachers turned professors, and so I'm a big fan of it. And I guess I'm going to hold the mirror up in front of our face, maybe as a tech community, to say, like, how do we challenge ourselves to address what you're saying? Um,
That's a great question.
the tech should enable us to provide what you are saying, which is more of real time insight, a platform to be created, what have you, that says, like, all right, here are the real time skills for all of these vocations. And I know we're talking about our company in the moment, but there are a lot of companies producing these certs, a lot of industries that are producing them. That maybe we can do a better job of making sure that education providers are more aware of these trends in real time. It does seem like something we should be able to solve.
The track record on this is pretty long and pretty convincing that the key is assessment. That
Mhm.
at any given moment, if you know what the skills are and you can measure them, you can say to schools, look, this is the equivalent of the bar. These are the set of laws here in Louisiana that you're going to have to, practice with, and here's evidence, and here's so forth. And the last leg should be your students might want to pass this test because people will require it. The move from necessarily being the content provider giving those courses to just being a straightforward assessment, and part of the job is that I got that certificate.
Um, yeah, I'd like to believe we can. To your point, we can make the assessment easier. We can make the access easier. Might be a challenge for everybody in the tech community to help in that regard. Um, John, I could keep you here for hours, peppering you with with questions about the future of the space. Um,
I have
certainly,
one question for you first.
I was going to say, I'll give it back to you to either make any hit on anything that maybe I didn't ask you about, and or um, turn the table around and ask me anything that you're curious about.
First and foremost, do you still play hockey?
Oh, I've never played hockey. I'm just from Detroit, so when you're born in Detroit, you're de facto kind of a hockey fan, and so I've got a good buddy of mine whose son is a pretty high level hockey player, and he's been having all these billet kids live with him for a long time that have been at the U.S. Development Center, which is also in our hometown. So I've gotten kind of quasi exposed to it via him.
Got it. Um, and on a business side, the infrastructure that's necessary to move higher ed to this agile, uh, lifelong
Yeah.
space um, has had a slow go. How does Google want to be part of getting higher ed there?
Well, I won't speak for our company. I will speak for myself in maybe espousing how I think that our ecosystem can help, and I think our team is trying to push in that regard. Like it does feel like we're at a time where there's the ability to, and the pandemic has really put us there. I think our team is having a lot more conversations with certainly people like yourselves, but boards of trustees and presidents and chancellors and provosts as they think about the future of their university and what does the product need to look like. And for our side, and we're not the only ones, but I think I'll just maybe speak more broadly for the tech community. I think there are things that we can do um, to help operationalize the university, help build more seats, help to run that scaled increase in number of seats. I think there are things that we can do from a in-class experience format, whether we talk about tech solutions like on our side, what can YouTube do to help the in-class and out-of-class experience? What can we do to help infuse curriculum? You and I were talking about that today with certs and whatnot. Certainly our Grow with Google team is focused on that. And then most importantly, how do we help get all of these partners into student outcomes that they can point to, that they can track, that we can then um, get better at, right? So if University X is really good at producing graduates long term for these five disciplines, how do we help them make that even better? How do we get them the right programs and again the right product um, to create increased opportunities for students, and that's why they're there. They're investing certainly mental capacity, physical capacity, financial resources, emotional. Like I think we owe them that better outcome, and so I do think the time has come. To your point, John, for all of us in this tech community to try to harness those resources that many companies have underneath them in a more intentional way. Working with veterans like yourself that have known this space for a long, long time, and have identified these issues that I think collectively we can tackle. We said at the beginning of the conversation, I feel like there's enough tech in the system now where we should be able to deliver it in such a way that it does create those better outcomes that are reduced costs long term. We haven't had that yet, and I would love
Yep.
to see it. And that's why, again, I'm holding the mirror up in front of my own face to say, what more can we do here?
Well, I'll tell you, in terms of axioms that you have to start with, the concept that the teaching, which is again only about 20% of the cost of higher ed, is the part you don't want to screw up, right? Like, so everything is about supporting faculty and supporting student faculty engagement. And we can get to the kind of savings you're talking about. We can make higher ed less expensive and we can make it better, but not by diminishing the quality of that interaction, but by supporting it better. So that like as a really important starting point. And then the other the final axiom I think about is collaboration at scale. Universities have been built to do everything by themselves. And in every other industry, nobody does that. We all use, whether it's open source
It's a good point.
coding or whatever. Um, how do we encourage schools while keeping their differentiation, in fact, enhancing it to collaborate on the things that don't make them different, but that could make them more efficient?
No, 100%. And you've hit on a good point here, which is how do we make the teaching even better? Are there things that we can do to make, as an example, to make the lectures more accessible online that then enables the in class experience to be even more valuable, right? More hands on coaching and teaching and um, mentoring, lab work, group work, all those kinds of things. I think there's a number of things that once we start to get immersed in it, we'll find solutions there. And to your point, I think our universities have felt like they've been solo acts across the country. How do we make them feel at least like there's an infrastructure underneath them that they can use for, to your point, efficiency and scale, so that they can innovate and focus on the areas that their school delivers best. I'd like to believe that there's solutions there. And I think we're probably closer to it. But again, I encourage all of the tech community to get more intentional about this and creating a solve.
I'm on board.
John, thanks so much. Anything else we didn't hit on that you want to catch?
No, it was great seeing you, and
Always.
maybe I'll get you out on the ice sometime.
Oh, yeah, you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. Or I don't want to do that. I'm sure you would enjoy it. Did you play? Do you play?
I do play, but badly, but I still really enjoy it.
I, yeah, that is one sport. Again, my geography betrays me. Nobody dragged me out on the ice as a youth in Detroit. But for all of our listeners and watchers here, we appreciate it. Please like and subscribe; helps us a ton. Until the next time, uh, thanks everybody. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, John.